The Southern Poverty Law Center, as you know, is in civil rights in Montgomery, Alabama, the birthplace of the civil rights movement. And we've seen protests like this produce real change. The fact that people are taken to the street for over a week now and peacefully protesting, exercising their constitutional rights to demand attention and a change to our criminal justice system.
You talk about them being peaceful, though there has been a lot of violence. There's also been a lot of infiltration that we've had reported on multiple times. You've examined this. When you look at the various groups that try and infiltrate protest movements like that, what do you find?
We find that far-right extremists, which are steeped in white supremacy culture and white supremacy ideology, they look for political chaos. They look for opportunities to disrupt. They hope to bring on what they call as a coming race war. We have a group known as the accelerationists. It's a violent string of the white extremist movement. And they, as I say, they hope to sow chaos and bring on a race war. So we're not surprised at all to see them infiltrating peaceful protests and starting these confrontations. Now, the president, of course, as you know, has named Antifa as a domestic terrorist group, or threatens to name Antifa as a domestic terrorist group, whereby the federal government, the FBI themselves, said that their investigations into domestic terrorism typically point to white supremacist groups. We've also seen members of white supremacist groups at these protests and rallies, and so we find the president's focus on Antifa as a distraction.
And in fact, Facebook today has called out one so-called Antifa group starting up as actually a more white supremacist group behind Antifa. And this is an issue, I imagine, even in trying to uncover this in terms of social media, how causes can be disguised.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Twitter discovered that Identity Europa, now known as American Identity Group, had started these fake accounts. So this plays into the president's narrative, which we see, and let me be clear, we see this as a clear distraction, taking away from the focus of the protesters, the peaceful protesters who are demanding a change in our criminal justice system.
The work you've done seems to me to have been incremental. We sort of have these junctures, and we're in one again. How much progress has been made, in your view, to try and change this sort of deeply entrenched culture, both in the police force and more broadly in the community?
I would say not enough, obviously. Certainly we have a history of white supremacy in this country. The country was founded on it, and African Americans today still find themselves burdened with guilt. And we see it from the enslavement through the Jim Crow era, through the civil rights movement, and still today, Black lives are threatened. And so we see this constant dehumanization that happens across the system, not just the criminal justice system, as you mentioned. We can also look at it in terms of experiencing this COVID-19 pandemic that has disproportionately affected African Americans, so that we're very aware of the lack of healthcare services, the lack of educational services, and this comes on the heels of not just the lynching, the public lynching of Mr. Floyd, but also the vigilante killing of Mr. Arbery in Georgia in February, and the killing of Breonna Taylor in her home. So these kinds of things just bring to mind a dehumanization that follows a pattern and practice in America today.
Australia has pockets of this, and we had an incident just this week where a police officer has been accused of using excessive violence. It's, of course, not the scale that you see in the United States, but what, in your view, should change? What does work in terms of reform?
Training works. I did see the clip that you're referring to, and it just seems that law enforcement officers are too easily triggered. So that tells me that they need training in de-escalation techniques. There should also be community oversight of law enforcement agencies so that community members can help bridge relationships between law enforcement agencies. We'd also call for an overhaul of investigation where investigations are done independently, that the police or the law enforcement agencies aren't investigating themselves. So it actually feels good to know that you all in Australia are alarmed by the incident that happened with that police officer, because that would be minor in the United States. So I applaud you, and I encourage you to stop it there before it escalates into use of deadly
Yes,
force.
and I think there has been a huge effort here to sort of really try and reform the police forces. It doesn't always work, as we know, but do you think there is, within many of the police forces across the United States, that commitment to try and root out that type of entrenched racism?
Not at all, not at all. And that's something that we have to work against. We do see, and you talked about this being a watershed moment. In these moments, we do see reform happening in some police agencies, but not enough. It has to be a directive from our federal government.
Appreciate your time as always, Lecia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.